Yo, what's up guys? I'm Dunmere. I'm a rank 1 peak Supervive player, and I'm going to give you guys a guide for Oath, the character that I really enjoy and have about 250 hours in so far. So I hope you guys enjoy the guide.
Let's discuss Oath's strengths and weaknesses, starting with the strengths. Oath's first core strength is that he has powerful crowd control, having two primary versions, his hammer swing and empowered shield bash. Both of these offer solid knockback that he can use to clear enemy teams away. This of course is quite valuable in a battle royale game where you'll often be forced by the circle to push another team out of a location or die. Yet these knockbacks become even more powerful as they can also stun enemies when they knock them into walls. So on top of her space clearing value, they can be used to lock down individuals while bursting them down, or maybe even used to do this to full teams. And while Oath's movement isn't the best in the game, it's solid enough that he can actually push enemies with this CC. This sort of solid crowd control stacks for even more value with his second strength though, his good team and self-sustain. Oath is distinctly strong at being able to keep a losing fight from becoming a guaranteed lost fight, as he can often use his heal and shield to help keep himself and allies up who are low. Of course, he can use his hammer while shielding, so on top of being able to push enemies back with his empowered shield while sustaining his team, he can even pump damage into them too. This allows Oath a great ability to guarantee reses on ally wisps, as unless his shield is broken and he doesn't have his self shield to restore it with, it can be difficult to force him off one before he can secure the res. On top of this, he doesn't even have to be on top of the ally to get a res off, as his heal can apply passive resurrection from range. Sure, enemies can just stand on them for a moment to stop it, but Oath will still find himself pulling off sneaky reses regardless, while also being capable of resing his ally that dies behind while he can keep pushing forward. So with these as Oath's strengths, there are still his weaknesses to consider. The first core weakness Oath has is inconsistent damage. While he is capable of dealing big bursts and chunking enemies, these bursts will come on top of a good dive engagement, as this damage is usually locked behind stunning his enemies up. So if Oath takes a poor engagement, then he really won't be applying much damage. And if he isn't able to take an engagement at all, then he'll only be able to poke a bit with his ranged hammer, which will definitely lose over time to most other ranged attacks. This just means that Oath needs to play better than most other characters to be getting the kind of raw damage value that they can get. And on top of this, it also means he's dependent on the map more than other characters, as he needs places to be able to stun enemies into. So while he can output huge damage, it's just something that can't be relied on, meaning he should be picked for other reasons. This leads us into Oath's second core weakness, which is really more of a fundamental playstyle and compatibility. Specifically, Oath isn't really what he looks like. He just seems like the big rectangle shield tank guy meant to just take the brunt of all damage and bully enemies with hammer swings. That isn't really what he is, and his visual design is a bit misleading. He just lacks the raw shield and personal HP this type of character would usually have, and also not having good answer to the many AoE damage and CC capabilities in the game. There are multiple characters that can stun Oath through his shield or punch him into a wall through it. And as mentioned, he can't defend himself from multiple range AoE abilities tossed at him. Instead, a lot of his tankiness depends on his empowered shield being used like a parry ability, while his aggressive capabilities are best used like a sort of CC based assassin. Add on a third playstyle of being a sort of backline support brawler, and Oath is just a combination of a lot of things. But if you expect to soak up damage and try to big hammer all your enemies to death like a berserker, you'll just be the one that dies. So with the strengths and weaknesses over, let's talk about how to actually play Oath. Oath is a character without one true playstyle, having traits of a disruption engager, a sort of burst assassin, and a backline enforcer. He's a bit weird, but regardless needs to be customized to the situation he's in, which is how you'll get the most value out of him. Leaning into the burst assassin aspects when your team needs frag output, throwing yourself into the enemy to pull as much of the enemy's aggro away from your team full of divers who want to come in after you, or focusing more to force enemies away from your backline while sustaining them instead. So with that as an overview of strategy, let's get into specifics on his abilities. Oath's hammer has quite a few nuances to it, as you have the option to play for both range throws and close range swings with it. You'll get a surprisingly consistent amount of value using your hammer throws though, even while the enemy is at close range. Sure, the hammer swings will allow for huge damage output, but you'll often find yourself unable to actually catch up to your enemy after you started charging one up. So when you're fighting, try and predict how the enemy will be able to move. If they could go too far or you likely won't be able to charge up your swing that much, stick to range throws. When using the range throws though, there are a couple things to think about. First, the hammer will only travel as far as where your mouse was when you threw it. So if an enemy is far or traveling away from you, you'll need to aim past them so your hammer doesn't stop short. Also, to maximize damage, be careful to call back the throw right after it passes through your target, so it's more likely to hit them on the follow-up. And try to line yourself up to where they are moving to also, so the follow-up will be even more likely to hit too. Moving on to Oath's shield, it shouldn't really be thought of as a normal shield, as it's actually quite low in HP. So in shielding, you want to default to treating it as a sort of parry for more dangerous damage bursts or abilities, and using it mostly only for its empowered form. This doesn't mean to entirely not use it for regular damage, as you'll still need to, but instead that you should just pay careful attention to its health. Because if you just shield up constantly, your shield will tank too much damage and not be there when you need it. You also need to be extra careful of letting your shield break at all, as you cannot use the empowered shield ability while your shield is broken. Moreover, you do take extra backstab damage from behind while using your shield, so you really need to position with your back safe. especially when you dive into the enemy. This means it's often best to not even use Oath's shield if you do get caught in between enemies. Also, the shield limits your turn speed while it's up too, but can be dropped and instantly put back up in a different direction, so make good use of this technique against highly mobile enemies to better protect yourself. On top of this, while using your shield, it's important to think about what type of damage sources are being used on you, as some area of effect damage sources are essentially ground located burn damage, so you won't be able to block that type of damage source that lingers. But you can stop AoE grenades if you ensure your shield is slightly behind the center of the explosion. As for Oath Healing Zone, it has an assortment of uses. It can be used to heal anybody on your team, at close range or at far range. It can be used to apply passive resurrection to an ally wisp, or even heal up Oath's shield. There are important use cases for each of these, but they're very dependent on the situation. When looking to heal allies, you'll really need to think about how much damage they're looking to take, or if they're likely to be anti-healed. A good healing on an individual or group can be quite useful, but anti-heal will completely negate it. And the slow first portion of the heal may not be enough to save your ally before they get burst down. When using it to apply a passive resurrection to an ally wisp, you need to think about whether that wisp will be likely to remain unstepped on for the duration of the res timer. Because if they're quite safe, then you might not have needed to use it at all. Instead, it'd be much more value to save the heal to use it on them after they're fully rezzed. And oppositely, if the situation is too dangerous, then the passive res might just become useless. You can, however, still use this to apply pressure to force an enemy to stand on the wisp, but you'll often get more value by accepting the wisp's loss and looking to save the heal for the rest of the fight. However, if you are dying, you can also cast a heal on top of yourself and proc a passive res onto yourself right as you get knocked. This is a very uncommon use case, but could be useful if you expect the enemy to run immediately or you're dying to something like the zone or mobs. And last, when using it in general on yourself, you should try to ensure you get some shield use beforehand, so you get the healing value on the shield. Though it is worth using just to restore the shield in case you accidentally let it break, you just have to keep in mind that Oath's heal actually does heal enemies too, so be careful of helping enemies out with all they mentioned value on accident. Now onto Oath's spin dash. It isn't terribly complicated, but does have a few unique things about it too. The biggest thing that's important to know is that while you can't cast this dash while your shield is up because it will use the empowered shield instead, you can immediately put your shield up right after to protect yourself during your dash, which is very useful when hard aggroing into a group of enemies. On top of this, the dash does deal a chunk of damage to enemies it hits, and the damage starts right as you swing, so you can even use it to deal a bit of extra damage to a close by enemy when dashing away from them. Just make sure to jump before whenever you use it to get a bunch of extra distance. And now for the ultimate. Oath's Fissure ultimate feels a bit inconsistent, but it's really just a bit odd. Enemies will only actually be stunned if they're hit by the Fissure crack itself, even though it doesn't really look like this. So if you're looking to land a stun on top of somebody with it, you'll need to get right on top of them when hitting it for the best chances. But you'll really just want to use it less for an instant stun value, and more for the damage and slows over time it'll give after the slam. So focus on using it while enemies would be stuck in it for a while for the highest value. Also, this ultimate can travel across the abyss and still have effect if used on the edge of land, and also can dunk enemies over the abyss if you hit people directly with it. Now that we have the specifics covered, let's talk about how to apply this into a full playstyle. Oath is all about recognizing which way he should play, judging this off of the type of team he's playing with and the type of team he's playing against. With this, he essentially has 3 core playstyles: 1 as a disruption engager, 2 as a space holder and sustainer, and 3 as a fragger. Learn how to recognize these and how to play these, and you'll get a huge increase in value on Oath. So for this section, I'll run through each of the 3 playstyles, and then explain how they should mold into things Oath should always be doing regardless, and what he should do in later phases of fights. To start off, we have Oath's Disruption Engager playstyle, where he plays to throw himself into the enemy team, pull as many resources from them as possible, and just generally cause as much disruption as possible. You'll want to play the style of Oath when the enemy has more range damage and pressure than you, which is basically just when a majority of your team is close range divers, like Flint or Shiv. In this situation, your team will just lose over time if they can't get close up and bully the enemy, but since your engagers like Shiv are often squishy themselves and will struggle to cover the distance against a team like that safely, that's where you come in to help them. When playing this style, you are not the carry. Your goal is to take the beginning neutral fight and completely flip it on its head, jumping directly into the enemy and causing as much threat as possible with your hammer stuns and empowered shield stuns. The better you threaten them this way, the more resources they'll put into you, which are also resources your diving allies won't have put into them, allowing them to frag out. When engaging like this, you want to hit as good of an empowered shield bash or ult onto as many enemies as you can. And ideally, you want to catch them by surprise, so coming from the shadows or a side angle is suggested if possible. Just keep in mind that you're likely to get absolutely bombarded with damage and CC right after you go in. So if you don't expect to be able to land a good enough stun, you should hold your empowered shield to block some of the stuns that come in. Pop your heal to make up for some of the damage, and spam hammer throws. Depending on how much aggro you're taking, you'll need to back up sooner rather than later. But if you dive to a location of cover originally, you can use the cover to block damage and maybe even escape. Your job is to pull out resources, not actually secure the frags. So your thoughts should immediately be to how you'll survive after you go in. Then when you've stabilized, you can go back in to help clean up the enemies. Moving on to the second type of playstyle, we have the Backline Enforcer. This playstyle is the opposite of the first. So you'll look to play it when your team has better ranged power, such as when the enemies are full of hard divers. Your job is to act as an extra bit of stability and deterrence to enemies. Your basic presence and stun potential will do a lot of this, For your initial gameplay, you shouldn't be looking to take a raw 1v1 with an enemy ranged character or something, but it doesn't mean you should idly be on top of your team. Instead, you should look to block off some of the stronger enemy attacks and cooldowns like ultimates or Kingpin's hook. This could even be something like dashing onto an off-angler who got a bit too much damage onto one of your allies, so that you can force him off for just a few seconds your ally needs to survive, before you then back up. Overall, your biggest job is to carry your allies and keep them protected for long enough to spam down all the enemy. So against a more ranged comp, you'll similarly want to ready yourself to move in front of and shield allies who get caught by a stun or become low HP using your dash if necessary. And then of course, your job is to heal them up before looking for the next threat. From here, either team will just be winning, or your next opportunity to help your team will arise if one of them gets knocked. Here you'll get great value by stopping ranged enemies from pushing when they do secure a knock, as you can shield on top of your Wisp ally to res them, while fighting the enemy back with hammer throws or swings. Sometimes you can even pull off a multiple ally res if you have the shield health and other resources to pull it off. However, this is how you should play this defensive style with ranged characters against ranged characters. Against hard divers though, this playstyle will need to change, especially when there is more than one of them. Your job in this situation is to simply keep divers off of your backline, so you should look to outrange and poke them out with your primary attack before they can even go in, while making sure to stay within range of your allies. When they do get a dive onto your backline, you should then counter dive back onto them and seize them off your team, and ideally into a wall so they can be killed. While this is pretty simple overall, as you either bully them to low HP before they can dive, or stop them from being on your team after they dive, you really need to be caring for the first engage, as that's where the divers will have a huge power spike that can crush your team. Now, we have the third playstyle, which is just to frag out. When your team lacks raw damage or is evenly matched in terms of range capability, Oath should play to focus on his raw value output in terms of kill potential. The base actions in this playstyle will change a lot with the specific situation, and are something that needs to be practiced a lot, but will generally look something like getting within range of a vulnerable enemy, which is often well done by surprising them from a flank, and then pouncing on them to stun them into a wall and then chain stunning them with your hammer swing. But there will also be situations where you need to just win ranged exchanges against enemies to soften them up before you can dive them. Throughout this, you really want to focus on targeting enemies that are split from their team to either kill them or herd them into their team where you can hit them with AoE damage better. You'll also really need to focus on using cover well, and you should prioritize using your heal and shield for yourself. In this sort of playstyle, you're unlikely to get a lot of value from indirect things that aren't basically just hard stunning and chunking enemies, getting a good group heal on your allies, or securing a wisp res. So this is what you should focus on. But how do each of these partial playstyles come together for a full playstyle, and are there exceptions to them? Essentially, each of the playstyles is just a direction for Oath to get value from, but in the end, this all translates into a way to reduce the enemy's health bar faster than yours. The first two playstyles are very extreme and specific with how they should be played, while the Fragger playstyle is just the rawest value-oriented style to accomplish this goal of making their health bars go down faster than yours. So the first two aren't something you should hard stick to throughout a fight, meaning if you see a play that is against the current style you should be playing to, you're still free to go for it, meaning you're free to turn into a Fragger at any time if it will guarantee you get more value than whichever of the first two styles you should be doing. This is something you should expect to happen as fights go longer and get more broken down though anyway. It's just about timing. The way you can recognize this timing is by asking yourself, is my job done? Or specifically in the disruptor case, have I disrupted enemies enough that now they're so disorganized and stuck in awkward positions that my team doesn't need more disruption? Or in the ranged character case, have I helped my team secure enough of an advantage in the range fight that they don't need my help? Or have I sufficiently protected my ranged characters from divers? When any of these answers turns to yes, you should then turn to the raw value Fragger style, pushing the tempo up to go for big stun plays and generally playing to your mechanical strengths, using cover to reduce damage, playing spread out from your team so you don't accidentally tank AoE damage, etc. Though of course, this is not entirely about fragging, as you still need to consider your heal, and how you use your shield. There is still plenty of opportunity to support your team doing this, but it should be in terms of and on the way to guarantee your own raw value, such as diving through your teammate to shield them, but also empowered shielding the enemy into the wall doing so, or giving your team a heal burst, but also using it to restore your own HP and shield. Overall, just transfer your mindset from how you're going to maximize your team's value to how you're going to maximize your own. The two will often overlap still, but that's okay as long as you keep this mentality in mind.